At the G7 Ise-Shima Summit President's press conference by Prime Minister Abe. There'll be remarks from the Prime Minister first, and this will be followed by a Q&A. It will be entertaining questions. So, Prime Minister Abe, please.
To begin my statement, first of all, as the Prime Minister of Japan, I'd like to welcome all of you who have visited this place of Ise-Shima. Thank you very much and welcome to all of you. I am sure that you had some good time appreciating and enjoying the beautiful coves, abundant nature, blessings from the land and the sea, indeed the attraction of heartful homeland of Japan. Whenever I come in touch with the air of Grand Shrine of Ise that is solemn and dignified, I always feel my back straightened. The shrine has spun the fabric of history from time immemorial of 2,000 years as a place of prayer for an abundant crop and the peace and happiness of people. The peace and prosperity of today is built on such prayers. From that shrine, this year's summit began. We are gathered here because we share common belief and responsibility. With these words, 41 years ago, our predecessors got together for the first time in the castle of Rambouillet, France, as they witnessed the crisis in the global economy called the oil crisis and agreed on an historic policy coordination. Today, our peace and prosperity is the consequence of such predecessors believing that the future can be changed, and jointly stood up and faced squarely the challenges of the time. And the peace and prosperity of today must be firmly handed down to the generations of our children and grandchildren. To that end, we who live in this day and age must not dodge from the immediate challenges before us and must face them up, joining our hands. G7 sharing basic values such as freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, leading the world's peace and prosperity hitherto, has a major responsibility. We were able to send out a clear determination to tackle a variety of challenges the world is faced with in cooperation with the friends of G7 here from Ise-Shima to the whole world. The biggest theme for the summit this time was global economy. Because of the decline in the equity markets, the world has lost in excess of 1,500 trillion worth of assets in a little short of 1 year. There are some recoveries in the recent past, keeping a momentary respite, but the opaqueness still remains and the markets are wavering globally. Why? Why is this taking place? The greatest risk is that there are some shadows beginning to be seen over the emerging economies. From the beginning of this century, what has led the global economy was the emerging economies full of vigor of growth. Even when the entire world was engulfed with economic crisis due to what we call Lehman shock, what led the economic recovery in the world was the solid growth of the emerging economies. In a way, they were the locomotives of the world economy. However, for the last 1 year or so, the reality is that their economy is decelerating all of a sudden. It is the reality. Crude oil steel, and other raw materials, agricultural produce, commodity prices have been reduced by more than 50% in the last 1 year. This is on par with the range of decline at the time of Lehman crisis, giving a major blow to the resource-producing country, as well as the emerging economies dependent upon agriculture and raw materials industry. Investment is food for growth, and this investment is being reduced. Last year, in emerging economies, the investment growth rate plummeted to even lower the level at the time of Lehman crisis. The flow of capital into emerging economies turned into negative domain. This is again the first event ever happened in the period after Lehman crisis. Furthermore, there is an increasing excessive capacity and non-performing loans in China. In emerging economies, some point out the delay in response in trying to cope with the structural issues. And there is a worry that this situation may further aggravate. With this backdrop, growth rate of the global economy recorded the lowest ever since the Lehman crisis. This lowest figure was recorded last year. This year's projection is revised downward, one after another. In the developed economies for the last couple of years, we suffered from the deflationary pressure because of the chronic and insufficient demand. Added to it, we have the deceleration of the emerging economies, which is bringing in a major sluggishness in the level of demand in the world. The greatest concern is the possible contraction of the world economy. The amount of trade of the world turned into decline from the latter half of 2014. It declined near 20%. This is the size of decline happening for the first time after Lehman crisis. Amount of imports by China reduced by 14% last year. This year, again, the decline is happening at more than 12%. So there is a risk that this contraction of world demand may be prolonged over a long period of time. But being pessimistic does not solve the problem. As the chair of the presidency of this summit, I devoted the greatest amount of time in the discussion of economic matters. But this happened not only to become pessimistic. We shouldn't be pessimistic, but we have to objectively and correctly perceive the risks which is there, here, and present. Unless we share the perception of risks, we will not be able to solve the problems joining our hands. Here, if we are wrong in our policy response, we will face a major risk where world economy could fall into so-called crisis that goes beyond the normal course of business cycles. So we, G7, shared this perception, and we shared strong sense of crisis. Now, there are some weaknesses we observe in emerging economies. In a time like this, it is the time that G7 should discharge its responsibility. At G7, we will cooperate, and we will have the advancement of monetary policy, fiscal policy, and structural policy. So we will be releasing 3 arrows. So this was agreed at our G7 meeting. It means that Abenomics will be deployed globally going forward. Because of TPP and Japan-EU EPA, we will be expanding the free and fair economic area to the whole world. We will create an environment where women and everyone can be dynamically engaged. We will have the advancement of the global health, inclusive of the countermeasures against the crisis in public health. These will serve as the foundation of the sustainable growth of the world. We will buttress the growth of emerging countries in order to raise the base level of world's demand. We will work under the common principle. We will vitalize quality infrastructure investment. We need to vitalize quality infrastructure investment. So such commitments of G7 were summarized in the Ise-Shima Economic Initiative. Such commitments were summarized in the initiative. Naturally, Japan, as the presidency of G7, will follow the G7 agreement. We will take initiative. We will be ahead of others in trying to make contribution to the world economic growth. In order to stand against the risks where world economy may plummet into crisis, we will mobilize totally all possible policy measures so that once again the engine for Abenomics would be revved up to the maximum extent. We are resolved to do so. What should we do in Japan? Including the discussion of whether we should raise the consumption tax rate, we will study and review all possibilities, and we would like to make our position very clear before the summer upper house election, House of Councillors election. We must protect the world's peace and stability. This is a major role for us, G7, sharing universal values. When it comes to violent extremism, it is a challenge, serious challenge against all mankind. We should have no places where terrorists can hide. We must eradicate the flow of money which will finance terrorism. New action plan is going to be a major step forward in order to fight against terrorism in good cooperation and collaboration of the international community. There is a swell of refugees arriving at the shore of Europe. In order to eradicate the fundamental cause of that, we agreed to strengthen the global assistance. Wherever the conflicts, whatever the conflicts, we should not resort to the use of force or coercion. We should act according to the international law. We must resolve in a peaceful and diplomatic way, whatever the conflicts may be. This principle will be solidly and firmly shared by us, G7. Wherever in the world, maritime freedom must be guaranteed. Unilateral action is impermissible. Inclusive of judicial procedures, the peaceful means must be pursued in this domain, and we must seek the complete implementation thereof. We agreed on that as well. Conflicts in Ukraine. Again, they have to be resolved based upon the international law in peaceful and diplomatic means only. I am confident that the solution will come only through such means. As G7, to all parties concerned, we will seek all parties to act concretely based upon the Minsk agreement for the peaceful solution. To Russia, we would like them to play a constructive role in all challenges that we find in international community. In order to achieve peace and stability in Syrian situation, I consider it important to maintain dialogue with President Putin. With the strongest expression, we will condemn the nuclear test which happened in January by North Korea and launching of a ballistic missile on several occasions. We condemn them with the strongest words. To North Korea, we will strongly demand that they will be responding to the international concerns, inclusive of abduction issue, with the complete and immediate adherence to Security Council's resolution of the United Nations. We will try to build a world without nuclear weapons. Looking toward nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament, we have a strong determination as G7. We once again confirmed that strong determination in order to realize a world without nuclear weapons. Realizing that is not an easy task. Even so, we will join our hands and we shall advance forward. So we share this strong determination and will to go forward, joining our hands. After this event here, together with President Obama of the United States, we'll be visiting Hiroshima, where atomic bomb exploded. At the place of atomic bomb explosion, we will be there, and we will honor all the citizens fallen victims of the war. And we shall convey the realities of the nuclear bomb explosion to the world. I think this will become a major force in realizing the world without nuclear weapons. I'm convinced about that. That atrocious experience should never be repeated. This is the major responsibility for the generation of ours who live now, in present time. For our children and grandchildren and the future posterities, for the benefit of these generations, we must create a better world. At Ise-Shima Summit 2016, that determination was confirmed by the leaders of G7, and we shall translate this determination into clear actions. This was a summit meeting which will serve as a big springboard to do so. It was a summit meeting full of substance. Lastly, but nothing the least, in holding this summit at Ise-Shima, we benefited greatly from the cooperation of the local people of Ise-Shima as well as the citizens of Mie Prefecture. From the bottom of my heart, I'd like to render my appreciation. So much from me.
We'd like to entertain questions from the press, starting with the Japanese press. For those of you wishing to raise a question, please raise your hand. I will call on you. When called upon, please state your affiliation and name before you raise your question. Please.
Television Tokyo, Miyazaki is my name. This summit was held in Asia for the first time in the last 8 years. South China Sea situation, North Korea, the security-related environment in Asia is becoming difficulty. Were you able to convey the difficult situation to European colleagues? In the World Economic Discussion, you have explained the before and after Lehman crisis, and you used the word contraction. So, inclusive of the level that you can describe as a crisis, what is the risk which may develop into the Lehman crisis level? And in order to counter that situation, what is the scale of the fiscal mobilization which is needed in Japan? Now, at this Ise-Shima Summit, this has been 8 years since Toyako Summit. So the first summit in Asia in the last 8 years. In Asian situation, European countries are geographically distant from Asia. Therefore, various security-related crises and dangers and risks are expanding. And maybe you are worried that Europeans do not share that worry. But indeed, this was the summit held in Asia, in Japan. So regarding South China Sea, regarding North Korea, the Asian security environment is becoming tougher and more difficult. I explained that. And I think this was well communicated and conveyed to the European leaders. Regarding the South China Sea situation, 2 years ago, at the Shangri-La meeting, I announced 3 principles in terms of the rule of law at the sea. Number 1, states shall make their claims based upon the international law. Number 2, states shall not use force or coercion in trying to drive their claims. Number 3, states shall seek to settle disputes by peaceful means. So these three principles I explained, and the leaders agreed to these principles. So this has become the common perception of G7. On the question of North Korea, in January, there was the nuclear test, and repeatedly after that, the ballistic missiles were launched. So the situation was indeed very dire and difficult. I explained that North Korean situation to colleague leaders. Having done so, as G7, the nuclear possession is absolutely impermissible, and the rigorous implementation of Security Council resolution must be ensured, and we must have a close cooperation amongst the G7s. I raised the issue of abduction, and as a result, G7 leaders expressed concern about this issue, and the communique includes clearly their concern about abduction issue. Regarding the global economy, we were not able to prevent the crisis called Lehman crisis or Lehman shock, as we call it in Japan. But we can't be pessimistic about the global economy. More than anything, we must solidly perceive the risks associated with the global economy. Unless you do that, you will not be able to come up with the correct countermeasures. On this particular point, we had the solid discussion regarding the status of a global economy, and we agreed on the perception that the world economy is faced with a major risk. And in order to cope with such a risk, we will have the total mobilization of all possible policies in order to raise the base level of world's demand to go for the sustainable growth. G7 will cooperate in tackling with this challenge. This is the robust message by way of the document called Ise-Shima Economic Initiative. So G7 countries will have flexible fiscal policies, and they will have daring promotion of structural reforms. Of course, G7 countries will have to do that in cooperation, especially in order to raise the base level of world demand. We will have to have the implementation of quality infrastructure investment, environment, energy, digital economy, human resource development, education, science and technology. There are areas contributing to the economic growth. In such areas, we must make a further investment. As for Japan, bearing in mind the G7 agreement this time, inclusive of the fiscal response, we will have the total mobilization of all possible policies so that we will strengthen the Abenomics three arrows. I'm determined to do that.
From non-Japanese media, and be advised once again to identify yourself with the name and outlet. Isabel.
Isabel Reynolds from Bloomberg. You've mentioned several times the importance of trade in spurring economic growth. How confident are you now that TPP will be ratified in its current form? And when do you hope to do that in the Japanese parliament? Also, are you satisfied with the language in the G7 communique about steel oversupply, which has particularly been blamed on China?
The respective countries are aiming for TPP to come into effect early, so they are proceeding with domestic procedures, and overseas they are respectively moving forward with their discussions, and we agreed that we would do that. For Japan to achieve medium-term to long-term growth, TPP would be the foundation for this. For countries that share basic values to deepen economic values and to enlarge the circle of these countries, that would be the strategic significance of TPP. The effect of TPP, in order to realize this as soon as possible, I would be calling upon the Diet to approve this as soon as possible. And internationally, I will exert leadership to boost momentum. for early coming into effect of TPP. As for China and the oversupply of steel due to China, the oversupply through dropping of international prices leads to deterioration of corporate income and anxiety regarding employment and jobs. It is having a major effect on the world economy. The Chinese government has announced that it would reduce overcapacity, but on our part in Japan, we are concerned that the reduction in view of the international market situation is insufficient. And government support, which distorts the market, as long as such basic issues exist, the reduction will not be rendered effective. That is our concern. This issue has been discussed at the summit. Respective countries have shared this awareness and concern. And toward resolution, to strengthen market functions, to eliminate support measures which distort the market, the necessity of doing so was agreed. And leveraging fora such as the OECD to engage in dialogue with major producing countries, including China. These were points on which there was agreement. I think this is a major outcome. Japanese press once again.
JG Press, Matsumoto is my name. I have a question regarding the possible increase of consumption tax rate. You said that regarding that, you'll make your position clear before the House of Councillors election, which will happen in the summer. As far as you are concerned, regarding that determination, you are going to ask for the vote of confidence from the voters during the election regarding this particular question. If you decide to postpone the raising of the tax rate, opposition parties are saying that the Abenomics, your economic policy is not bearing fruit. So if you decide to postpone, do you have an idea of dissolving the lower house so that you can really ask for the approval of the voters? First, Abenomics is a failure. This is the criticism by the opposition parties. It is totally off the mark. It is not the case. Employment jobs are maintained at a very favorable rate. Job seekers over job offers, the number is very good. So we have proceeded with the Abenomics, and employment increased by 1.1 million. But before that, before our administration, the jobs are decreased. It is happening not only in capital cities, in local cities. There are more job offers than job seekers. To one job seeker, there is more than one offer. So the number one, the rate means that one person seeking a job and there's one job offer, but our number is above one. Before our administration, out of 47 prefectures, only 8 prefectures had the number above 1, but out of 46, in 46 prefectures, the number is above 1. Wage hike from the year 2000 is happening at the highest level 3 years consecutive. The irregular workers' salaries are also at a high level. So Abenomics is not a failure at all. I would like to be very clear about that. Having said so, I would like to refer to G7. I said that the G7 is faced with the risks, and we are sharing that sense of crisis. So, having done so, in order to counter this major crisis, we agreed internationally to cooperate in terms of policy. This is a fact which carries certain weight. As the presidency, Japan will show leadership, and we are of the view of contributing to the world's growth. All possible policies will be mobilized so that we will once again rev up the engine of Abenomics at the maximum level. I am resolved to do that. I said all possible policy measures. Naturally, it would include the discussion on how we deal with the consumption tax rate. As of now, we have not produced any conclusion. G7 agreement was only agreed today. Regarding the concrete policy responses, we'd like to spend more time in reviewing what we can do. So I cannot respond to your hypothetical question. In any case, before the House of Councillors election, I will make the position clear.
We've come to the time to close, but we'd like to entertain just one more question. Last question. Gun from Vietnam Television. G7 is very strongly opposed to action which threatens maritime security and attempts to change the status quo. That is the stance of the G7. If there is no improvement regarding the present situation, or if the situation deteriorates, to put a stop to this unilateral action, what response would you take? As for maritime security, the respective leaders of the G7, between them, it was agreed that maritime order based on international law and principles and the importance of freedom of overflights and the concerns regarding the present status of the East China Sea and South China Sea. There was a convergence of views on these points, and it was included in the leaders' declaration. G7 clearly demonstrated its resolute stance with regard to the South China Sea situation, as I answered earlier. 2 years ago, at the Shangri-La conference, I announced the 3 principles of the rule of law at the sea. And I led the discussions, and regarding this, the respective leaders of the G7 agreed, and it was a common awareness of the G7. And as for the Philippines, they're awaiting results of arbitration, UNCLOS-based arbitration. The results are expected to come out soon. From the standpoint of rule of law and the importance thereof, it's important that the respective countries clearly demonstrate their stance. And this discussion took place not only during the G7 meetings, but during the outreach meetings where the Prime Minister of Vietnam was present.
Time has been over, so let us wrap up the G7 Chairman's press conference. Thank you very much for your cooperation.
Thank you very much. ありがとうございました。